Hello and welcome to Partially Redacted, a podcast where we discuss data privacy engineering and related topics. I'm your host, Sean Falconer, and today I'm joined by Dr. Lorrie Cranor, Director and Professor in Security and Privacy Technologies at Carnegie Mellon University. And we'll be talking about Carnegie Mellon's Privacy Engineering course and Dr. Cranor's research on privacy decision-making. Dr. Cranor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. I'm excited for this. So let's perhaps start with the basics, nothing too tricky. Who are you and what's your backstory for how you ended up as a professor and researcher in the privacy space?
So I started working in the privacy space about 25 years ago after I got my doctoral degree in engineering and public policy. I started working at AT&T Labs in New Jersey, and I was interested in internet policy related issues, and there was an opportunity to get involved in a new standards effort to develop web privacy standards. And so I went to the meeting and thought I'd check it out. Seemed like something that might be fun to work on for a few months. I ended up getting involved in and then chairing the Platform for Privacy Preferences Working Group at the W3C. Spent the next 7 years immersed in privacy standards. Along the way, realized that a really important thing would be for the privacy standards to actually have user interfaces that could be usable to people, or this wasn't going to go anywhere. When I left AT&T, I decided to go to academia and focus my research on the usability side of security and privacy. So I came to CMU, and I've been here for almost 19 years now.
That's amazing. That's a long history in the privacy space. And there's definitely, I want to certainly spend some time talking about usable UIs for privacy and security. But, before we get there, you started your journey in the space 25 years ago. From what you recall, what was the sort of privacy community and people working in the tech spaces, their sort of thoughts and interpretation of privacy from that era of the internet?
So I think this was the late 1990s, and Congress had just discovered that internet privacy was a thing, and they were telling the FTC and others, you need to do something to fix this. The FTC was starting to hold hearings. Industry was trying to make the problem go away. People were saying, well, we'll just post privacy policies and it will be good. I think to start with, there wasn't a lot of efforts to actually improve privacy. It was more of a focus on, well, let's just be transparent, notice and choice. We tell everybody what we're doing, give them choices, everything will be good. And then in Europe, they were starting to pass privacy laws, and they wanted to do more than that. And I actually remember going to meetings in the U.S., industry meetings, where people were saying, well, those are very European notions. In the U.S., we're just sticking with notice and choice.
Do you think, I guess the fact that Europe was sort of ahead of the game in terms of passing privacy laws, and as you mentioned, people's sort of interpretation or reaction to that being those are European notions. Do you think there's a cultural difference, I guess, in the way that people think about privacy on an individual basis that has impacted this rollout of, adoption of privacy laws in that throughout, the world and in different areas of the world?
There certainly are cultural differences that have had some impact. I'm not sure that in the case of privacy and how much people value their privacy, the differences between the U.S. and Europe are that big to account for the more substantial differences in regulation. So I think history and the types of regulatory structures they have in Europe have maybe played more of a role in this particular case.
I see. Well, One of the other things that you mentioned during your introduction is that you've now been at Carnegie Mellon University for 19 years, and you are also, the director of the privacy engineering program, which I believe started in 2013, so it's about 20 or 10 years ago. What's the history of that program? Like, how did it start? What was the motivation behind creating a master's degree program focused on privacy engineering?
Yeah, we started offering courses, individual courses in privacy engineering topics a few years before that. And we were getting a lot of interest from students. And we also were getting a lot of calls from industry saying, hey, we're trying to hire privacy engineers, and you seem to be teaching some courses. Do you have any graduates who could come do these jobs? And, we had a few people, but realized that there was a growing demand for privacy engineers, and nobody was training them. There were no privacy degrees other than in law schools at the time. And it seemed like there was a need for this. And so we spent some time talking to people in industry about what exactly they were looking for in privacy engineers and what kind of training they would want, and looked at how we could take our existing courses, add some new ones, and evolve this into an entire master's degree program.
That idea that students were bringing this up and expressing an interest in it, that really resonates with me as well. We had Jake Ward, the CEO and founder of Data Protocol, on recently, which also offer a certificate program for industry professionals in privacy engineering. And one of the big things he talked about in that conversation was that engineers care about privacy. There's this it's misrepresented that engineers don't care about that. And I gave a guest lecture actually at a university several months ago. And one of the first questions I got from a third year student after I was done was, why is this the first time I was hearing about this? And he was kind of annoyed that he hadn't been taught about some of the challenges the companies are facing around data privacy. And even for myself, I really didn't get that much exposure and I did 3 degrees in computer science and worked as an engineer for a long time. It wasn't until I joined Google that I really had any exposure to privacy engineering, privacy programs, except PCI, things like PCI compliance. And there seems to be something that's like fundamentally missing, I guess, from a lot of computer science and software engineering education. So do you think privacy education should be part of standard software engineering undergraduate programs?
Yeah, I think it should be. I also think there should be more security education as part of standard undergraduate programs. I think both privacy and security have been fairly neglected in those programs. So yeah, I would like to see more that's just built into the programs. But beyond that, I think then there's also a need for additional courses for people who want to go deep.
Yeah. With privacy engineering, I think it's a very cross-functional skill set in training. So which department does the privacy engineering master's program sit into? Is that within computer science, or is it something else entirely at CMU?
So at CMU, we have a school of computer science that has 7 departments within it. And we are in one of the departments in the School of Computer Science.
Okay, great. And then if I was taking the master's degree program, like what does that consist of? Is there a research component like a typical master's degree, or is it completely class-based?
So it is a course-based program, but it includes a practicum project where the students work in teams on a capstone with a sponsor for an entire semester. And students have the option of doing research as part of it as well. Some students will do research with a faculty member instead of one of their elective courses, or instead of a summer internship in industry, they will do a research internship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see. And then you mentioned this in the School of Computer Science. So are most of the people's undergraduate backgrounds computer science going into this master's degree program, or is there some diversity of educational backgrounds?
Yeah, so most of our students come from computer science backgrounds, but we do accept students from other backgrounds as long as they have some computer science experience, generally, gained on the job. And so we have had students come from other types of engineering and sciences, and even from backgrounds like communications. We've had some students make that transition into privacy engineering.
For the ones that don't necessarily have a computer science background, how much technical training is part of the privacy engineering program? Are they, do they need to sort of be able to understand like general software engineering programming principles?
Yeah. So we will only admit students into the program if they have already demonstrated some programming experience and some college level math experience, preferably calculus. And so we've had some applicants who were otherwise very good, and we've told them, go take some classes, at a community college or online, get that background, and then in a year or two, come back and apply. And we've actually had a couple of people do that.
Yeah, I think for anybody that's looking for the future of where a lot of technology companies are going, moving into a privacy engineering career, I think, is a great greenfield space. There's tons and tons of companies that they can't find enough people that have privacy engineering experience. So do most of the graduates actually end up in a privacy engineering career, and what sort of companies do they typically end up at?
Yeah, most of our graduates have ended up in privacy engineering. Sometimes not the first job after they graduate. We found that a lot of companies are looking for privacy engineers that have 5 to 10 years of work experience, which many of our graduates don't have. Some of them do because they were working and then came back and got their master's. But anybody who's gone straight through wouldn't have that level of experience. Personally, I think the companies should be a bit more open-minded about hiring students with less experience, because they're having trouble filling these privacy engineering jobs. But in any case, we have a lot of students who go directly into these roles, and then we have students who will take on kind of general software developer, software engineering roles for a couple of years, and then transfer into a privacy engineering role, either at the same company or hopping to a different company. We have a large number of graduates who now work for Google. They're probably our largest employer. We have them at Facebook, Snap, all the big technology companies. But we also have some in the financial industry, at different financial institutions, at some of the big consulting companies, and then also at some other companies that aren't particularly in the tech space, but increasingly need privacy engineers. Like we have a graduate who's at Nike, for example.
Yeah, I would think a lot of businesses that are, Nike, Target, Walmart, all these types of companies that we might not think of as traditional technology companies, they have a tremendous amount of tech that's going on within them. Like every company, to stay relevant and innovative, is a technology company to some extent at this point. And they are certainly storing a lot of data that is probably regulated, and they want to secure because they don't want to end up on the front page of the New York Times because someone got into their systems and leaked all that information.
Exactly.
The Carnegie Mellon University also offers a certificate program, privacy certificate program. So what's the difference between that and the master's program? And is it a different person or a different profile of person that's going and taking that certificate program versus the master's program?
Yeah, so the master's program requires 3 semesters of full-time study, or if you do it as a part-time program, it's still pretty intense, and it's going to take like 2 or 3 years to do it part-time. The certificate program is 4 weekends. That's it. You have the whole certificate. So in 4 weekends, obviously, we can only scratch the surface of privacy engineering. But for a lot of people, what we found is that's all they want. They don't want to commit to doing a full degree program, but they would like to increase their knowledge of privacy engineering. So that seems to work for a lot of people. We've had some who've done the certificate to kind of test the waters, and now they're thinking about coming back for the full master's. And we also have folks in the certificate who have even less of a technical background, because they don't actually have to write any programs or anything as part of doing the certificate program.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Just kind of looking at the fact that the program's been around for 10 years. And I think there has been a shift in consumer awareness, and also I think how companies think about privacy and customer trust. And that's probably in part of the growing, privacy regulations around the world. But there seems to be, some sense of urgency for companies with regards to customer privacy, or it's more front of mind and they're prioritizing these things. So how has industry awareness or challenges in relation to privacy changed engagement with the privacy program over the past decade? Has it grown a lot from when you first started back in 2013?
Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot more privacy engineering job posts, and therefore a lot more companies coming to us looking to hire our graduates. Also, because we have these capstone projects that are sponsored by companies, we're getting more interest from companies in sponsoring the projects and working with our students. So yeah, I think the industry is much more aware of their need for privacy engineers.
And what, from your experience of working with students, what actually ends up tending to attract people to moving into roles in privacy? A lot of these people are graduating with computer science degrees. They could go into industry, start making, a very nice living as a software engineer, but they're choosing to go down the path of learning more about privacy and potentially becoming a privacy engineer.
Yes, so I think there's a variety of motivations. A lot of our students have somewhat interdisciplinary backgrounds. So besides their computer science interests, they may have an interest in the law or policy. And so this is a way of kind of combining their interests. Some of them have just a very strong personal interest in privacy, and they'd like to have a career that aligns with their personal interests and values. And they see this as closer to their values than just, building random code that they may or may not care about. Lots of different things I think draw people to privacy engineering.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think it's something that, it's great that there's job opportunities, but it's also something that I think you can be very easily passionate about and have combined both, your technical training, making a nice, potentially probably a nice living, as well as actually doing something that feels personally meaningful.
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears a bit and start to talk about some of your research. So before diving into some, specific questions about some of the studies you've conducted, just broad strokes, how would you describe your area of privacy research and the types of problems that you're interested in studying?
So I've been focused on the human side of privacy research. And so I'm interested in understanding people's attitudes and preferences related to privacy, as well as in building tools that it will make it easier for people to protect their privacy. So I do a lot of user studies.
Nice. Yeah. And I definitely want to talk about some of this. So I guess some of your specialization is around, privacy related decision making. So what have you discovered in terms of how individuals think about making privacy decisions?
Yeah, so there's kind of a popular thought that people don't really care that much about privacy because they so readily will give up their privacy. And we've done a lot of research to try to understand that. And basically what we've seen is that it's really hard to figure out how to protect your privacy or to even know when your privacy is at risk and when it's not. And so the trade-offs of privacy versus all of the convenience and services that we want are not so clear-cut. And the fact that people seem to be foregoing privacy is not necessarily an indication that they don't care. And in fact, when we talk to people, most people do care about privacy. And it's really a question of what sort of trade-offs they're willing to make. And there's increasingly people who even just feel like there's nothing that they could do. Even if they put in the time and effort and money, they couldn't protect their privacy. And so they've basically given up. Mm-hmm. We've been exploring a lot of that.
So in terms of companies' responsibilities when it comes to making sure that their users understand what their privacy options are and not feel hopeless in terms of managing their privacy. What can companies do to go beyond just the minimum terms of communicating privacy choices to users?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, companies should offer good choices because there are a lot of things that are called privacy choices that aren't really the choices that consumers are looking for. So offering those choices and not giving users kind of a lot of bad options. There really is no good option here. So that's a start. And then when you give people real choices, making them easy to access and very clear. So I don't have to go dig through lots of menus on your website to find the choices. They're not written in a legalese, so I can't really understand what they mean. Things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like a lot of times the user interface for navigating and understanding privacy controls in this piece of software is super complicated. You might as well be trying to fly a plane. So, what does your research help teach us about improving the usability of those privacy controls?
So I think a lot of it is, good usability design. I think many companies have usability teams that focus on the core part of their product, and they never have them touch the privacy-related pieces. And what we've seen is that for any sort of usability, you have to test it with your target audience and make sure that they can use it. It doesn't matter if the developer can use it. You need the target audience to use it. And companies just aren't doing that for their privacy interfaces. So, we've seen in our study that, every time we run a study with users, there's always something that surprises us about what people think and how they're using it. And, companies really should go through that exercise and understand what's tripping people up, and then try to make improvements accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that even goes beyond this specific example of privacy controls, where I think historically companies have made the misstep a lot of times of assuming that they can test some part of the product that's not maybe the core product. Like documentation is a really common example when it comes to a developer tool. They test that with their own internal engineering, but they have so much understanding of the product already that they don't really have the real user in mind, and you end up with a bad product at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I would say, testing is a really big thing. And then I think there are also some conventions that we have in the industry that aren't really very good. And companies just use them because everyone else is using it and it seems safe. But we should probably take a step back and find better ways. So, for example, we've been looking at the cookie banner interfaces. And there's some standard terminologies that everybody's using to describe cookies. And most consumers really don't know what those terms mean. And we would probably do better if we adopted some clearer terms everywhere.
Hey there, it's Sean, host of Partially Redacted. You probably guessed that, since at this point in the interview, you probably recognize my voice. I've been told for years that I have a face for podcasting, but no one has mentioned whether I have a voice for podcasting, so sorry about that. Hopefully, the awesome guest makes up for it. Anyway, if you're enjoying this episode, please support the show by subscribing and telling your friends. You can also join the Partially Redacted community at skyflow.com/community. Okay, that's enough for me. Back to the show. Yeah, I think that's a great example of something to talk about. Over the last few years, there's been almost every time you go to a website where they're essentially collecting any information, you're going to be hit with the onslaught of a cookie consent overlay and pop-up. And this is the first thing that you see. And of course, everybody loves pop-ups. So they're always ready to read everything that's there. But so, what was the event that kind of led to the introduction of the consent dialogues for consumers to start with?
So I think this came out of European law and the fact that companies were told that they had to have informed consent before using most types of cookies on websites. If there were essential cookies, it wasn't necessary, but for all but the essential cookies, they had to have informed consent. And under European law, that means opt-in consent. So you can't place a cookie until the user has opted in. And so that leads to a desire to put something in the user's face as soon as they arrive at the website, so you can opt them in right away, and now you can set your cookies. And thus we have the cookie banner pop up. And then I think in the United States, we have some companies that are doing that because they're also trying to comply with European law. But increasingly, I see it being misused by companies who don't really understand why they're using it. And this is especially small companies who don't have big teams of lawyers or privacy engineers to steer them. And I've actually talked to some of these organizations and said, all right, you have a cookie consent banner that's completely meaningless. I don't even understand I'm an expert and I don't understand what you're trying to communicate here. I don't understand why you have this. And they're like, well, we thought everybody had to have one, and so we just put this here. Yeah, that's kind of a problem.
Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily that companies are like intentionally tricking users into accepting something. It's more that they just don't understand even what they're asking, but they understand at least enough that I'm supposed to have something. So they just put something up, and then, it leads essentially to a bad user experience.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing. And there are now a bunch of companies in the consent management platform, CMP business, that are providing packages that companies can get for a low cost, sometimes even free, that will put these banners on their websites. And some of them, the default settings aren't particularly privacy friendly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how should these prompts be designed to help maximize usability?
So one of the things that we see is that users will click on buttons. They want the button that makes the prompt go away. They don't want to have to go through multiple menus. So if you have a choice of accepting cookies or click on a link to manage cookie preferences, and I don't know what's going to happen when I click on that link or how hard it's going to be, nobody's going to click on that link. They're just going to click on the button, accept the cookies, make it go away. If, on the other hand, you put your cookie choices, each one is a button. So I have 3 buttons in that panel. One is accept all cookies, one is accept only strictly necessary, and then I could have another one that's some subset of cookies. Then a lot of people are going to choose between those buttons because they can see all the choices right there. You can still have the link or another button if you want to manage all the fine grain details. Hardly anyone does, but it's there for those who want it. But those 3 big buttons, that's going to help a lot of people. So that's what I'd like to see companies moving towards. Now, in addition to that, I would also say we need to move towards a framework where we don't solve this problem with lots of pop-ups.
Yes, I would love that. I do feel like I have recently started to see that pattern, the button pattern that you're seeing. Not super common, but I have seen it a little bit. Do you think, privacy regulations like GDPR need to be more prescriptive in terms of how people meet their requirements? Like, should usability guidelines essentially be part of those privacy regulations?
Yes and no. So I would love to have good usability guidelines be part of those regulations. I have also seen that the regulators don't know anything about usability either, and are not well equipped to write those guidelines. So this puts us, we have this tension here. And in fact, I've seen examples of best practice that have been put out by various European regulators that are really not very usable, and people have said to them, like, why are you putting this out as a good example? Like, it has all of these problems. So I think maybe the solution is for the regulation to say that we need to have these things be usable, and that they have to be tested to ensure that they're usable. And then perhaps for the regulators to work with usability experts to make guidance that isn't necessarily built into the regulation, but is a companion set of guidance that shows examples. And that may be kind of a compromise in a way that also helps make sure that what they claim is usable actually is usable.
Yeah, maybe they just need to include a line to say, run your UI by Dr. Cranor before you go live.
Yeah, there you go.
So with these usability tests that you're running, where you're testing privacy choice and testing other things with user, does the collection of the actual test data run into any issues around privacy that you have
Yeah.
to navigate?
It can. So since we are in a U.S. Academic institution, we have to use an institutional review board to review all our research protocols with human subjects. And they are very keen to see what kind of data we're collecting and what we're doing with it. We try to minimize personally identifiable information. And when we do an online study, we can actually really minimize that a lot. So we actually just finished collecting data on cookie banners from over 1,000 users. We don't have their IP addresses. The only identifier we have for them is their Prolific ID. And Prolific is a company that recruits crowd workers for studies. So Prolific knows who they are and Prolific paid them, but we never get that information from Prolific. And we don't give Prolific any of their study data. It's completely separate. And so this allows us to protect people's privacy, and we try to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I can remember when I was doing my PhD and running usability studies, having to go through that same sort of internal application process to make sure that you have a review board that makes sure that the things that you're collecting are in violation of any sort of rules or regulations. So another area of research that you have published about is around this notion of a privacy nutrition label. So what exactly is a privacy nutrition label, and what problems is it meant to address?
Yeah, so the idea behind a privacy nutrition label is that there should be a short, simple format for privacy policies that has a lot of the properties that a food nutrition label has. So generally they're in kind of a tabular format. They're very short. They're standardized. They use consistent terminology, things like that. And the hope is that if you can boil down the privacy policy information to this label, it will make it very easy for consumers to compare privacy policies across companies and also look for the information they particularly care about. So we've done designs for website nutrition labels for privacy. We've done mobile app labels, and we're also working on IoT device labels.
Oh, that's great. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I think it's something that like a consumer could readily understand. And my understanding is Apple, introduced these to the App Store in I think 2020, and then Google's done it recently as well. But the labels are generated essentially, they're self-generated by the app developer. So in those, in the App Store, how good is the actual resulting privacy label if the developer themselves lack privacy training and education?
Yeah, so they're really problematic. We did our work on app privacy labels about a decade ago, and nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, Apple rolls them out, and we were very excited until we saw them. And we discovered that, first of all, consumers don't understand them because they use kind of strange terminology. And second, developers don't understand them, both because they use strange terminology and because they're really complicated for developers. And so we've done studies both on the consumer side and the developer side and realized that they have a lot of inaccuracies because even well-intentioned developers aren't getting it right, and consumers don't understand them anyway. And we've started to look at the Android labels more recently, and they're different. They have different problems, but they also have a lot of problems.
I see. Is there, third-party services and companies that help developers or will help developers essentially craft these privacy labels, or maybe there's not really an industry for that particular offering?
I think it's emerging. I think that some of the big privacy companies are starting to offer services along those lines. I've recently seen some advertisements for new services. Here at CMU, we have some projects where we are trying to develop toolkits for developers. So we have students that have built a toolkit where a developer can basically take their app code and the tool will automatically generate a lot of the label based on the developer's code, and also prompt the developer to answer some questions in their code. So there's some things that you can completely figure out automatically. There are others that you have to ask the developer, okay, so when you send this data to this other place, like what happens there? And the developer is going to have to answer some questions. But it's a lot easier to answer it in the context of looking at your code than in the abstract later.
Yeah, that's amazing. That sounds like incredibly useful. And I imagine it puts things in the context of the understanding of the developer versus something that's like written generic and super abstract that they might not be able to map what their product's actually doing to this more, general notion of privacy for these apps.
Yeah.
So I guess what advice do you have for developers that are maybe struggling with this problem? Maybe there's some that they have the right intention, but maybe just lack the training. What advice do you have in terms of helping them create an accurate privacy label?
Yeah, so in the absence of tools, there are at least glossaries that both iOS and Android have on their developer sites that tell you all the terms and what they mean and how you're supposed to use them. And so I would say definitely read those very carefully. We found in our studies that the developers just tried to guess without reading it. And then when they went and read the definitions, they were often surprised at what some of these terms meant. And they could do a much better job after they read the definitions. But hopefully there will be tools available in the near future that will make it even easier.
So moving away a little bit from your research and kind of looking ahead to the future, what are your thoughts, I guess, on the future of privacy engineering as something that's going to be, or I guess, a role that's going to expand within the technology industry?
Yeah, I think it's continuing to grow, and I see no sign of that stopping anytime soon. So I think we'll see expanded roles for privacy engineers, and it's also interesting that privacy engineering is not a monolithic area. There's so many different roles, and even within one company, I mentioned we have a lot of graduates who are privacy engineers at Google, and there's at least half a dozen different types of privacy engineering roles that I've seen our students take there. So I think that the industry is finding even more uses for privacy engineers and reasons that they need them. And I think that will continue to happen.
Yeah, I would just, these, specialization within privacy engineering is not surprising to me. I think that's kind of that's the trend for all engineering, or really all roles, as things become more widely adopted. You have bigger programs, you have to have specialization, and something like privacy is such a big space. There's, over 100 privacy laws in the world. It's like, no one person could possibly keep up to date on everything. So it makes sense that people are going to have certain specializations as companies invest and develop more advanced programs. They're of course going to start, just like you have specialization within software engineering, you're going to have these specialized roles within your privacy program.
Yeah, I think so.
In terms of, predictions looking ahead to privacy education and awareness, do you think more universities will start to offer programs like CMU, or at least a course introducing the basics?
I think we'll see more courses. I'm actually kind of surprised that here we are 10 years later and there aren't other master's degrees in privacy engineering out there. There are other certificate programs, there are other courses, but I haven't seen another school offer a full-fledged master's degree. But eventually someone else is going to do it. But I am seeing more courses and more students who are applying to our master's program who one of the reasons they say they're applying is they took a privacy course as an undergrad and got interested in privacy. So that's nice to see.
Yeah, and I think that's needed. If you never have exposure to a particular subject area, it's hard to know, oh, wow, this is really interesting. I think in retrospect, if I had been exposed to it as an undergrad, I would have thought like, oh, well, this is really interesting. Maybe I would have pursued a master's degree in it. But you just, like you mentioned earlier, there's not enough sort of security and privacy exposure in most undergrad computer science programs. So people typically end up going down career paths or, graduate programs that are more familiar to them.
Yeah.
Outside of, education and the awareness challenges, what do you think the big gaps in data privacy are today? Are there future technology or developments that you're excited about?
So I think, we're still looking for kind of the silver bullet that lets us protect privacy and use data. And differential privacy has given us that tool in some areas, but I don't think it works well enough in as many domains as we would like. And it may be that there is no silver bullet and we're never going to completely have that. But, finding ways of balancing the use of data with privacy protections is, I think, something that we're all continuing to struggle with. And hopefully over time, we'll find better techniques to make that work.
Yeah. And, in conversations with various people in the context of this podcast, I think differential privacy, homomorphic encryption, like a lot of these kind of future-looking privacy-enhancing technologies is something that commonly comes up as things that people are excited about. And I think it really always goes back to that trade-off of data security versus data utility. How can we essentially maximize security while still allowing us to actually use the information?
Yeah. So, and then I guess the other thing I would raise is that on the user side, it is really unsustainable to have users interacting with privacy pop-ups all the time. It's bad enough that we have to do them for cookies, but we have surveillance devices all over the place. And with IoT devices all over the place, it is not realistic that every time you walk by a smart thermostat or a smart light bulb, you're going to have an interaction with it. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so we need some way to make that privacy choice scale. And I think that the only way to make it scale is to take it out of the hands of users to do it one-off every single time. And so we need systems where we are transmitting privacy choices in a machine-readable way, that users can set up their preferences and have user agents that automatically send signals with their choices. And this is all seamless and easy for everybody to understand. So I'm hoping this will happen in the future. I've been talking about this vision since I got involved in privacy tech in the late 1990s, and perhaps I was just 25 years ahead of my time. I'm hoping that soon we will have something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's one of the reasons why, for me anyway, your research is so interesting. I think it's I haven't seen a lot of, publications focused on this side of privacy. And I think it's a really important one. In a lot of ways, we're in the GeoCities era of essentially privacy controls, 25 years later, fast forwarding today. So for people who are listening to this and they want to learn more about, your research and other things that's going on at Carnegie Mellon University in this space, what resources would you advise them to check out?
Yes. So for educational resources, if you're interested in the master's program or the weekend certificate program, check out privacy.cs.cmu.edu. That's all about our privacy engineering program. And then for the research that I've been working on, that's on my lab website. That's called the CUPS lab. So cups.cs.cmu.edu.
Great. And I'll include both those links in our show notes. Anything else you'd like to share before we start to wrap up?
No, I think that's good.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show and for sharing your expertise. I really enjoyed learning about your research, and I think listeners are going to get a lot out of the conversation as well. I'd love to have you back at some time in the future to dig into some of the other things that you're doing in your research and some of the things that your students are doing.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.